Everybody, my name is Kevin Non-Apostate. I am an ex-Catholic, or maybe still a Catholic. It kind of depends on your definition. But this is Conversations with Catholics, episode 2. Today I am joined by Greg the Non-Apostate for a conversation kind of just about general worldviews, I think. We have a little bit of a plan going into the conversation about how we're going to do things. And we're kind of going to start from the ground up. Greg and I have had a whole big conversation, not whole big, but we've had a few emails back and forth, kind of just about like the ground level, building from the bottom up, how like a worldview takes shape. And Greg has some questions for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of just give a brief intro to who I am and how I got where I am today. Greg's going to ask me some questions, and then we're going to swap halfway through. Greg will tell me a little bit about his beliefs. I might ask him some questions. And that's about it. Did I summarize that right, Greg?
I think that was done quite well, yes.
Perfect. All right. So without further ado then, my name's Kevin. So I grew up traditionalist Catholic at an FSSP church that my grandparents helped to found. Religion was a really big deal in my family. I have a cousin who's in the seminary to become a priest. My brother went to the seminary but discerned out. I was an altar boy. I achieved the highest rank of altar boy at the FSSP, which is just Master of Ceremonies at a traditional song high mass. So I still have all the Latin prayers memorized and all that. My confirmation name is St. John Vianney because I thought I wanted to be a priest when I was confirmed. Evidently that did not happen. When I was in my early 20s, I started thinking about... So I just didn't feel like gay marriage was wrong. So I wanted to explore why the church taught that gay marriage was wrong. That led me into diving into teleology, because teleology pretty much explains why the church thinks that gay sex and gay relationships are wrong. I realized that I just didn't think that teleology was correct. So then I started thinking about. Oh yeah, no.
Kevin, for the slower folks at home. Could you define teleology for us?
Yes, I definitely can. So teleology is the study of final causation. So Aristotle taught that there are 4 causes for why anything might happen. The fourth and final cause of his 4 causes is the telos, plural of which is teloi, or I might be mispronouncing that because it's Greek. But a telos is the end or the purpose of a thing's existence. So The church teaches that the telos of sexual reproductive organs is reproduction. So any use of those organs that isn't for the telos of procreation is disordered. That's the word that they'll use, is disordered. So I just realized that I didn't actually think that teloi exist. So that was kind of like the first thing for me that was like, I don't know if I believe that's true. That led into me looking into things like hylomorphism. So like the idea that there's like substances and forms and stuff. I realized that I didn't really believe in substances. So without substances, you can't have transubstantiation. So when I realized that I disagreed with the church on enough things, I just eventually had to stop calling myself Catholic. And then I guess I could just say a sentence on the whole marriage situation that I had. So when I moved from... So I got a job offer right out of college that was 700 miles away, but they only told me that I was moving with less than... It was honestly, it was 3 weeks notice. And so I told my parents, hey, I don't believe in Catholicism. And also, my girlfriend's moving with me because I don't think it's a sin to live together before you're married. That was too much for my parents. So the word that I'll use is, manipulated. That might be a strong word. And they certainly wouldn't use the same word. But I was pretty much told, hey, listen, if you want to be part of this family, you have to marry your girlfriend before you live with her. So we did. We got married. We only had a 3.5 month engagement. And that just left such a bad taste in my mouth that was kind of the input. Even though I didn't really agree with the Catholic Church, I didn't think that transubstantiation was real, I would still go and just partake of the ceremonies and stuff like that. But then after the whole wedding thing, I stopped partaking in the ceremonies and stuff. So I think that's probably a pretty good place for me to go ahead and pause and just kind of let you ask questions and stuff like that. Because that was I gave you the super high level view, and I think that we're about to dive into it.
Yes, for sure. And there's also a couple of different fuller versions of your testimony available in other conversations that have been previously recorded.
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested in diving more into the story, they can certainly see those. And one of them is in the is it called An Introduction to the Non-Traditionalist Catholic? Or?
Yes, An Introduction to the Non-Traditional Catholic. That was just the first video that I put up on my channel. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So as far as teleology goes, what would you say? Would you say it was the whole gay marriage thing that was the primary catalyst for your dropping the idea of teleology, or what was it that led you to conclude that teleology is not a real thing? So
catalyst is the right word, because it's what started me looking into teleology, but it's not that it's not like the whole gay marriage thing actually didn't have anything to do with me dropping my belief in teleology. I just didn't find evidence that teleology existed. So it wasn't so much that I found like by way of education, I'm an engineer, so I do like I lean on the empirical like real heavy, and I'm aware of that, and I work against it because I don't want to fall prey to like empiricism or anything. But
and empiricism, that's, I really love that you're very conscious of that. And empiricism, for again the slow folks at home,
it's just
would be.
Do you want to explain it? Do you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
Okay. So empiricism, or like scientism, sometimes people will talk about, is really just the idea that all knowledge comes from the empirical, all of it. Like there's nothing that you can know that isn't empirical. And so I don't accept that, because I do make certain presuppositions, just like I think that we all do, namely just the logical laws for me. That's the only presuppositions that I make. That's the only presuppositions that most people make. But I just want to point out that I am an engineer, so I'm the kind of person who would like fall prey to empiricism probably. So I do actively try to fight against it. But I didn't find any empirical evidence that teleology was like an actual model of how things really are. And I also never came across any kind of syllogism that ended in therefore teleology is true. Either one of those things, either empirical evidence or some kind of syllogism that ended with therefore teleology is true, either one of those would have worked. I haven't found either one though. And then there is just this other thing too, where teleology is prescriptive. All of science is descriptive. So teleology will say that something happens because that is what is supposed to happen. Science doesn't say that. Science just says like, hey, we've got some models that describe things that happen. Like that's it. So the law of gravity says nothing about like, oh, like, you know, these two bodies will attract each other because they should. There's nothing like that going on.
It just
Science
says
is
that
just
they
saying
do.
it's just going to happen. Like it's just, we're just describing these natural phenomena. Teleology is not descriptive though, it is prescriptive. And because it's prescriptive, that makes me think like, I don't think that's right. So again, I don't have any kind of like, I don't have any kind of syllogism where therefore teleology is false. I just don't need it in order to explain anything, really. I don't need it to explain anything. So you can summarize my disagreement with teleology as pretty much just being like, I think that we've just moved past Aristotelian physics. And like, I think it's also important to remember that Aristotle did think that he was doing actual physics when he was talking about the four causes and stuff like that. The book in which like, we call Aristotle's work like metaphysics today, but he just called it physics. And in fact, the word metaphysics just means after physics, because Aristotle wrote about physics, and then after Aristotle wrote about physics, people started describing his work as like after physics, metaphysics.
Okay. Okay.
So I just don't think that Aristotle had the right science, pretty much, and that's about it.
Okay. Okay. What would have, you said you just haven't seen any evidence for teleology. What would constitute evidence for teleology in your mind?
Like some kind of predictive power. So like, let's say that we knew that all, I mean, like, you know, make your example of a prediction that teleology should be able to predict. And then if that prediction came true, then that would be an example of like teleology making like a true prediction. But as far as I'm aware, teleology doesn't even make any kind of predictions like at all. Teleology kind of exists in the world of like should, and not as much in like the world of does.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So, but to clarify, like kind of what you just said kind of sounds like the scientific method. Like you set up an experiment and you propose, you get your hypothesis that when we do this, this is going to happen. And if it does, and then it can be replicated, then you have a scientific theory, that kind of thing. How is that different from teleology and what you were just talking about?
So teleology is a description of the universe that Aristotle, well, it's part of a description of a universe that Aristotle made. So Aristotle described things as having 4 causes, of which the final cause was the 4th cause. And I just don't think that Aristotle was right about that. I also just don't think...
So,
go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking as we go here, and I'm just thinking, would you describe the difference between teleology and the scientific method as simply the difference between science and philosophy, essentially? Or
no, because teleology just isn't a science. It doesn't
that's what I'm saying, is that would you describe it, like teleology would be more of a philosophy of like the whys behind everything, as opposed to the whats or the concrete thing that's happening, if that makes sense?
So still no, because like Aristotle, when he wrote about teleology, he wrote about like intrinsic and extrinsic teloi. So like an extrinsic teloi would be like a telos that is imbued upon a thing by somebody like us. So like we could design a hammer, and then like, the telos of the hammer is to hammer, but that is a extrinsically
imposed.
But an intrinsic teloi is like the telos of an acorn seed, or an acorn to grow into an acorn tree. That's an So like he was making Aristotle was trying to say that one of the reasons that an acorn grows into an acorn tree is because it has the telos of to grow into an acorn tree. So it's not quite philosophy. It's almost like science.
Okay. So do you disagree with that? That's, to me, that sounds like an example of concrete teleology right there. Is an acorn seed, growing into an acorn tree. Would you say that the acorn seed growing into an acorn tree doesn't follow? It's not an end or a purpose for which the seed exists, I guess?
So I'm not sure how one would get from acorns will grow into acorn trees into therefore a telos of to grow into an acorn tree exists. Like those seem like 2 separate things to me entirely.
Okay, because telos speaks of something that transcends the physical aspect of things. The telos is by nature a non-physical, or I guess I'm trying to understand.
Aristotle would just describe it as a final cause. Like, why did the acorn grow into an acorn tree? Well, for 4 reasons. The like material, efficient, formal, and then final ends. And the final reason why an acorn grows into an acorn tree is because it has the telos of to grow into an acorn tree.
Okay.
And so like
So
the material end, or like the material cause would have been like, and I might be screwing this up, but like the material cause would be like the seed, like, and there's dirt and water, and like when you combine those three materials, then you get a tree. So that's like the material causes of the growth of this acorn tree was like the water and the seed and the dirt. But then like the formal cause would have been like, because acorns have a form of like an acorn tree, and like that's like the whole essences and forms type thing. The final cause would just mean like, you know, so one of the four reasons why an acorn grows into an acorn tree is because it has the telos of to grow into an acorn tree.
Okay.
So yeah, this is all just like very old. Like, you know, Aristotle was writing over 2,000 years ago, right? So I just think that they had funny ideas about like why things happened 2,000 years ago, pretty much.
Okay. So then to back up and to revisit what you said about being able to, I asked you earlier what would have constituted evidence for teleology, and then you answered, and I got confused at that point between the difference between that and something like science. So again, what would be a concrete example of something that would demonstrate that, where you would say, oh, there's evidence for teleology?
Well, so the best like piece of evidence would just be any syllogism that ends with therefore teloi exist, or therefore teleology is true.
Okay. And how would that, like, so for example, like the first example that comes to mind would be gay marriage, since that's been brought up already. And so trying to figure out how that perspective syllogism would play out.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, and I think that's kind of part of the
Okay.
reason. Like, you know, I guess I guess it would look something like this. If X, then teleology is true. X, therefore teleology is true. Like that's like how the syllogism would look if teleology was true. But what is X? I don't know. Like, so, if it could be demonstrated that teloi exist, then teleology is true. It has been demonstrated
Okay.
that teloi exist. Therefore, teleology is true. Like that would be like one way to like prove that teleology is true. But we've already collapsed the syllogism back into the empirical, because now we need to prove that
Right.
teleology is like that teloi exist.
Right. And so that my question is like, how like hypothetical, if that were the case, if teleology could be proved, what would it look like is what I'm
Yeah, I don't
kind of
know.
wondering at this point.
I don't know. I guess we
Okay.
would need to like demonstrate that like the four causes are correct, and that I don't know, like if every single acorn ever. No, I don't know. Because Aristotle would say something like any acorn that didn't grow into an acorn tree is simply a defective
Mm-hmm.
acorn.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know.
Okay.
I don't know how you would like prove it.
Okay. Fair enough. So you made reference earlier to the fact that with regard to empiricism, that empiricism says that the only way to attain knowledge, correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, is through empirical means, and that you said you deny that there's essentially other ways to obtain knowledge as well, or how would?
So I think empiricism makes the claim that you can't have any justified beliefs that aren't empirical.
Empirically demonstrable. Yeah.
But I think that I'm justified in my belief in things like the logical laws, even though I can't demonstrate those empirically.
Okay.
Like they're kind of pre-empirical in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think I'm justified in believing that I'm not a brain in a vat, even though I can't prove that empirically. So that's the problem of hard solipsism.
Okay.
So that's why I wouldn't call myself an empiricist.
Okay.
Although, I'll admit that I have sympathy for the empiricists in the sense that I think that 99.9% of our beliefs are empirical. Like, they're empirically based. Like, the only exceptions are those things, like I mentioned, like hard solipsism related things. Because even a lot of syllogisms wind up breaking down to the empirical.
Okay. So it sounds like it's fair to say that you actually do believe in that certain things exist that aren't necessarily, or certain things are real, they have existence, that are not necessarily physically demonstrable. Would that be accurate?
I would. So let me rephrase that
For
because I think so.
yeah.
I would agree that you can be justified in believing things that can't be empirically proven. Now, it's a very small group of things that you can be justified in believing that cannot be empirically proven, in my opinion. So I'll go further and say that you are only justified in believing things that cannot be empirically proven if those are necessary for your functioning in the world in which we find ourselves. So you should have as few presuppositions as you must in order to operate. Everybody needs a certain number of presuppositions, but it's your job as a person who wants to be rational to minimize your number of presuppositions, because the worldview that has fewer presuppositions is just more parsimonious than a worldview that has more. That's pretty much it.
So something like logic itself, for example, you would say that logic exists.
So no, I actually wouldn't say that logic exists, like it has existence. I would just say that like the law of identity appears true to me and I accept it as true.
Okay.
But that's actually a different claim than saying like logic is a thing with brute existence.
Right. Well, and and to the extent that it helps, may not. When I say exists, I'm not referring to the Platonic sense of existing in Plato's garage somewhere. Dan, I just mean it's real, but at the same time, not physically. It has no physical properties to it, essentially.
What I'll say is like I accept that X equals X. Like I think that's just like that's like a no nonsense way of kind of getting at what you were getting at. So I don't have to say, I don't have to use the word exist or anything like that. I don't even have to use the word real. I can kind of just cut right to the chase and kind of just say like, yes, I believe that the law of identity holds.
Okay.
I think that's just the easiest way to do it.
Okay. Not to belabor, but this might be an important point later on. So just to continue with this a little bit, I understand what you were saying just now, but to go what I think is nominalism here for a second, logic. We all know what that is. Well, you may have answered this, I guess, already. I was just going to say, would you say that logic is a real thing? No. That's how I guess I want to put it this time. You would say it's not. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that like it is true that X equals X. So I guess I would have to ask you what you mean by it is a real thing. The way that I interpret that is like it has existence in like the same way that an atom has existence. And so my answer to that is no. But if by just a real thing, all that you meant is like the things that it claims are true, then I'd say yes. So I guess it matters on what you mean, but but yeah, I don't think that the logical laws exist in the same way that this can of Diet Dr. Pepsi exists. Or Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepsi. Where's that head?
I'm still working on my own coffee. I'm not thinking 100% either, so.
Well, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon for me.
Yeah, that's early.
I'm without excuse.
So you said something important. You said that it depends on what you mean by real, logic being real. And that's and you said if you mean it's real in the same way that an atom would be, then I reject that idea, and that's good. I do as well. But I do want to highlight the fact that I believe that it would have to be real in some sense, in some other sense, in order for us to be speaking about it. If you know what I mean? How can we refer to something that doesn't exist and employ it in our conversation when it's not real, when it's not there? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Um, so it's possible that I'm misunderstanding your question, um, but I would I would want to say something like we refer to things that aren't real all the time. Like we can just bring up dragons right now, and now you and I both
Mm-hmm.
have this idea of a dragon in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it even like we're conveying concepts to each other too about dragon, and like these concepts are like real concepts, and real as
Mm-hmm.
in like we can actually imagine them in our mind. Like we can imagine a beast with scales and can breathe fire and it has wings and all that,
Mm-hmm.
even though dragons don't exist. So I guess
Okay.
I guess that my response would be something along the lines of like things don't have to be real for you and I to be able to discuss them.
Okay. Um, would they have to be real in order to be uh, I want to say in order to be real. Would they have to be real in order to be what's the way to say it? To have direct impact on I don't know how to say it, I guess. Because what I'm getting at is fair point that, dragons are not real, but we can talk about them anyway. But if we were to talk about a dragon, we would have to talk about it as just as a concept that is not real, and it would at no point would our world be upset by the fact that all of a sudden a dragon just breathed fire on us, and we would die or anything like that because the dragon doesn't exist. But conversely, or contrary to that, something like logic does have a direct impact on the real environment around us, and therefore it seems to me like it would have to be real in order for that to have an impact, in order for that to not just have an impact on reality, because dragons, the theory, the idea of a dragon has an impact on storytelling, for example. But the dragon itself, the hypothetical dragon itself, isn't going to. It's not real. It doesn't have any real world consequence in itself, whereas something like logic does. Do you kind of know where I'm?
I do, and I think I know how to respond to this. And
Okay.
I think that all that's happening here is we're kind of getting like screwed up with the word like real.
Mhm.
So I think that we're kind of thinking about real in two different ways simultaneously, while um I'm trying to not talk about real in the two different ways simultaneously. So
Okay.
I'll prefer to use phrases like has like authentic existence or something like that.
Hmm.
And then also it appears to hold. So those are two different things that I think that we may be conflating within the word real. So
Okay.
what I would agree with is that it does appear that x equals x. That
Hmm.
holds. Every single time that I interact with the world, um, x equals x. Every single time that I interact with the world. So
Okay.
I would agree that x equals x every time that I interact with the world. However, I would not then conclude that the logical laws are things that have real existence in like a platonic way, or as far as I can
Hmm.
tell, not even in a moderate realist sense.
Okay. Okay. To you, final question on this topic: would being authentic or having true existence necessarily entail physical properties of some kind? Is that would that be your definition of authentic or real existence.
What are you encapsulating under physical properties of some kind? Because I'm thinking about things like energy. Like, I think that energy, like kinetic energy and potential energy, definitely have existence. And like we can even measure energy. But do you consider like the amount of potential energy within a system to be a physical property? If you do, then I would say, yeah, things do have to have these physical properties. But if by physical property you mean more something like, do they have to have mass? I would say, no, they don't need to have mass. Energy doesn't have mass. Light doesn't have any mass. But both of those things are. So does the light have physical properties? Like, I mean, it has a wavelength. Is a wavelength a physical property? I guess I would need to know more about what you mean by physical properties.
Yeah, by physical properties, I just mean, is it able to be picked up by one of the five senses, essentially? Does it have a visual property of some kind, or a taste property of some kind, or an audible property, one of the five?
I acknowledge things that exist that aren't detectable by any of our five senses.
Okay.
So things like infrared light cannot be detected by our five senses. Or do you just mean something like detectable at all? I suppose that
detectable at all with one of the senses. So infrared light is a good example of how, right, human beings can't see infrared light, but infrared light is still, it's called red for a reason. It's got a physical property of redness, in spite of the fact that we can't see it.
Infraredness, right? We can't see it.
Or
like
infraredness, right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's beyond the visible spectrum.
Right. So able to be picked up by one of the senses at all, whether human or any or machine or any by any.
Because there's other things like radiation. Device. Like humans don't have an organ that detects radiation,
right?
But we've invented machines that can detect levels of radiation. So maybe the word that you just mean is like empirical. Like, do you think that there's anything? So then I'd say no. I don't think. And here's where I have to acknowledge the limit of empiricism. I don't think that we would be justified in believing that anything exists that is not detectable empirically beyond the things that we must assume to exist in order to go about our daily lives.
Okay.
So I already acknowledged that like the law of identity can't be proven empirically, but I'm okay with believing that because you have no other choice. But beyond those things for which you have no other choice, I do think that you need to be able to acknowledge them empirically, or else I don't think that they have real existence.
Okay.
And even the logical laws, I'm not going to say have real existence. I'm going to say that they like just appear to be true. They appear to be they appear to hold.
Okay, so that's, I guess there's a good example. Well, okay, I'm going to think on that some more and then maybe revisit later on. Okay, so awesome start here. You adhere to nominalism, mereological nihilism, and moral anti-realism. Can you summarize each one of those briefly for us?
Yes, a sentence on each. Nominalism is just the opposite end of like Platonism. So it goes even further than moderate realism. So Plato thinks that these like non-natural entities exist inside of Plato's cave. Moderate realists think that they exist, but they're instantiated in the individual thing. And then me, the nominalist, would just say, no, those things don't exist at all. They're not even instantiated in the individuals. It's just like a lexicon thing that we use to describe them. So I'm a nominalist. Okay. I'm also a mereological nihilist. So I think that the only things that actually like truly exist are the mereological simples. We don't know exactly what those simples are, but frankly, it doesn't matter. So this is a little bit controversial because I am saying that, Kevin, the man, does not exist. Rather, I am a collection of mereological simples arranged Kevin-wise that I just refer to as Kevin out of convenience. And then also I'm a moral anti-realist, which I think just kind of comes from nominalism, to be honest. I think that if you're a nominalist, I'm sure that there's a really smart philosopher who disagrees with me, but I can't imagine being a nominalist and a moral realist at the same time.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it seems to me like all three of those things kind of flow logically from atheism. You would base, well,
Well, so no,
no, I guess you
wouldn't,
would.
because like Buddhists are atheists, you know, and like Buddhists definitely believe in spiritual stuff like that. So I wouldn't say that they flow from atheism.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting topic. Well, maybe the whole Buddhism thing. Um, well, let me put it this way. It seems to me that those three ideas flow very naturally, very logically from the idea that the universe exists by way of an accident, essentially. That there's no telos to it. That 14 billion years ago, something blew up, and that what exploded, evolved literally into what we have today. Uh, it only makes sense that that the idea of concepts and morality and that kind of thing, and doing things a certain way because we should or shouldn't, is it that's all sort of extrinsic to the idea of the randomly exploding universe. Does that make sense?
Let me push back only on the word accident real quick.
Okay.
I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. I almost think that there are no accidents. I'm actually a determinist.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So as far as I can tell, the laws of the universe are deterministic. Now, it's possible that like the quantum stuff throws me for a loop here because like I'm I'm a chemical engineer, so I've taken like a decent amount of physics, and I still don't understand quantum physics because most people don't. Like,
I was gonna say, because who does?
right, right. And I think that like a lot of the people who talk about quantum physics really don't know what they're talking about. Like, I feel like I know enough physics to know how much physics I don't know, if that makes sense. But so I understand that some people think that quantum physics gives us this idea of a non-deterministic universe because there is like random, like there's a random number generator part of quantum physics. So
Right.
that aside, the rest of the universe is deterministic as far as I can tell. So I actually don't think that there are any accidents.
Okay.
And I guess it also just depends on what we mean by accident too.
Sure.
But I do want to thank you for saying that my ideas do seem like they are like compatible with each other. So
Yeah, and I'm a thinker, so I'm a little slower in that regard in some respects. But I
I'm
really
just really
ponder
dense.
things from.
I'm just a very dense dude. So
Well, you're a very intelligent dude, it seems. So
well, thank you.
that's good. And, yeah, and it seems that I think you and I agreed previously that we all human beings, all of us, have a tendency to act in ways that are not terribly rational on many occasions. And so it's always interesting to me to encounter somebody who says, "Oh, I'm all about this," but then at the same time they're about this other thing that kind of goes against what it is they say they're about, and that kind of thing. And so I'm always all about analyzing things and seeing how they fit together or don't. And in your case, like I said, those three principles all tend to flow pretty smoothly and logically from the idea that so when it comes to the word accident, I of course am referring to a philosophical accident. Essentially natural materials doing whatever they do because they're just doing whatever they do, not because they were created and with a design.
Yeah, maybe I can just kind of like ask if you mean by accident, you just mean not done intentionally.
Yes, that's probably a fair. Yeah,
Okay.
and not done intentionally, and not done by any external agent, essentially.
Yeah, I think then that I would be happy. Like if accident just means not done intentionally, like an agent didn't do it, then I'm happy to say that I think that this universe, as far as I can tell, it is an accident in the sense that it's like, as far as I can tell, an agent didn't design the universe on purpose. As far as I can tell.
Okay. Okay. Have you looked into intelligent design as a scientific theory.
Oh yeah. I mean, I grew up a young Earth creationist.
Okay. But sometimes people confuse intelligent design with religion as a proper science. They confuse that with sort of religion, and um, the science itself. I'm not anything approaching an expert on that, but as I understand it, the science itself is pretty compelling as a science, and it does not propose who or what the designer might be, but it is pretty convincing in and of itself that there would have to be design to our existence. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. So, have you read the book The Privileged Planet? That's the book that's
I
coming
have
to mind
heard
for
of it, but
me.
not read it.
Who wrote that? I don't remember. But there's a book called The Privileged Planet, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a book written by some guy with a science degree. Who's it by? I just pulled it up uh, on my phone. Give me 1 second.
Hmm.
Um,
Does the name Michael Behe sound familiar? Or
maybe Guillermo
I don't know.
Gonzalez. Okay, that I don't know
Oh,
who that is.
Gu-
Um, but
Guillermo Gonzalez.
the full title of the book, it came out in 2004, and it's called The Privileged Planet: How Our Place in the Cosmos is Designed for Discovery. And the whole book is about like, hey, not only is it super unlikely that any life should arise at all, but we are
Hmm.
also placed in the universe in a spot where we can observe a lot of the universe. So like
Hmm.
if our planet, like if everything was the same but we were much closer to the center of the Milky Way, then like all the
Hmm.
other stars, like sure we could live, but all of the other stars would pretty much just blot out the rest of the universe, so we wouldn't be able to see beyond the Milky Way. But because we
Hmm.
are positioned at the edge of the Milky Way, we can see other galaxies beyond just the Milky Way. And like, wow, isn't that cool? And my response was like, yeah, that is pretty darn cool. But pretty much all that I'm seeing here. So the reason why I don't agree with the reason that I don't agree that therefore we must have been put here like by an intelligent agent, is because all that I'm seeing is, imagine that we have like, a million die, like a million d6, and we roll them
Hmm.
all and we get a certain number. What's the
Hmm.
chance that we get that certain number? It's one in a trillion chances. But we're gonna
Right.
get that one number. Like
Hmm.
there's gonna be one number, no matter what it
Hmm.
is. Every single number is gonna be like equally unique.
Hmm.
And so, as far as I can tell, we are in one of a whole bunch of differently equally unique circumstances, particularly with respect to time.
Okay.
I would not be so. It seems overwhelmingly likely that life would arise in our universe at some point, because this universe is so incredibly old and there's so many planets in so many galaxies that it doesn't seem surprising that life did arise eventually.
Okay.
That's kind of my stance.
Hylomorphism. Let's talk about that. What is that? And tell me why you don't.
Yeah, so it's going to wind up being really similar to the teleology discussion. So hylomorphism is just the idea that like a thing can have like an essence that is like separate from its accidents, to put it into Catholic terms. So the
Mhm.
ultimate Catholic example of this would be like the Eucharist. So Catholics
Mhm.
believe in the true presence, obviously, right? So it's not just that the thing that used to be bread, it used to have the accidents and the essence of bread.
Mhm.
And then after consecration, that thing is no longer the same thing that it used to be. Its
Mhm.
accidents are still bread, but now it has the
Mhm.
essence of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
I reject that things have substances that are different than their accidents. I think I kind of
Okay.
just reject the existence of accidents, of substances at all. I'm just going to say
Mhm.
that a thing simply is what its accidents are. So anything that's made out of bread is bread. Like, so
Mhm.
if you have a small circular um, loaf of bread, like that is bread.
Mhm.
That's kind of just like my point. So the person who accepts hylomorphism thinks that things can have essences, like, and I just don't think that essences exist. Things are just what their accidents are, according to me, to put it into like Aristotelian languages. So I don't know if that made sense.
It did. It did. Yeah. Okay. And just a super quick on this one, just to clarify for anybody that isn't already clear on it. Some would suggest that presuppositions are not justified, or I don't know, I guess different people would put it different ways. But I just wanted to point out that you do presuppose three things in life: identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And possibly more things too. I haven't thought about it like fully.
Okay.
But I do have certain presuppositions. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Free will. It sounds like from the brief conversations that we've had on the topic, or conversation, sounds like you believe that we have it, but not. You said not libertarian free will. Can you explain what libertarian free will would be, and what it is, what type of free will you think we do have?
Yeah. So the type of free will that I think that we have is I'm a compatibilist. So what a compatibilist is somebody who thinks that we live in a deterministic universe. However, we still have a will, as in like we still desire for things to happen. That these desires are chemical reactions that are going on inside your brain. And the way that I describe the difference between like libertarian free will and like determinism free will is I say like, imagine that you made a decision, and then imagine you rewound the entire universe to the moment that you were about to make that decision. If everything was exactly the same, like we just rewound time, and all of the brain chemistry was the same and the outside influences were the same, the person who believes in libertarian free will is committed to saying, I think that person could have done otherwise. I'm simply saying, I don't think that person could have done otherwise because we live in a deterministic universe. So that's essentially my view. People have desires and they act out those desires. Like, yeah, cool, I'm on board. But I don't think that we have the ability to do otherwise if all of the external stimuli and all that were the same.
Okay, so then in what sense is the will free?
It's free as in like we do what we want to do. I want to raise my arm right now, so I did.
Right.
That's how it's free. It's not free in a libertarian sense. It's free in a compatible sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's... I feel like I understand what you mean and don't understand what you mean at the same time. Because, or better put, I understand what you mean, and yet it doesn't...
Want to ask some
like
questions,
I'm still wanting
maybe,
to say,
see if we can get to the bottom of it?
Yeah. So somewhat, you said we do what we want to do. Okay. So it's after dinner and your wife asks you if you want dessert, and you do want dessert very much, but you're thinking to yourself, if I have, I'm diabetic, if I have dessert, it could cause some problems there. Do you have the ability, the capacity to make one choice or make the other? To say, yes, I want dessert and to eat it, or to say, I've thought about it and no, I'm going to pass on dessert. Do you have the choice to do one or the other? Or
yeah. Maybe this would help if I told you this. You will make one decision, and that one decision that you make is going to be one that you chose, but you could not have chosen the other decision.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully that helped.
I think it does. Yeah. Okay. So I guess it seems like the term free then wouldn't fit.
Yeah, and that's libertarian kind of just means like totally free. So I believe in a will.
Right.
Like we all have will. But is that will free? Well, certainly I would say no, not in a libertarian sense. It's free in the you're going to pick whatever you want. Like Like, what do you want to do? Do you want the enjoyment of the dessert, or do you want to avoid the dangers that come with eating food that's like unhealthy for you or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
That
But
you're gonna do what you
yeah,
want. Whichever one wins is the one that you're gonna do.
right,
But you couldn't have done otherwise.
right. So it seems to me like it's kind of a distinction without a difference. Like you're gonna do what you want, but it's not as if like you were gonna do something other than what you want. You're just
Yeah.
doing. It doesn't not want doesn't matter. You're just doing the thing. You're not doing I think it sounds like it would be more accurate to say you're going to do the thing that you're going to do rather than you're going to do the thing that you want to do because it seems to
the
me
compatibilist is the person who says that the thing that you're going to do is the thing that you want to do. Like the compatibilist would say something like that. And obviously not all the time. Like
right.
people are forced into positions where they have to do something that they don't want to do. Like
Mm-hmm.
sure, like that's not what I mean when I say
Mm-hmm.
like you're going to do what you want to do. I think that like I'm capable of making decisions. I just don't think that I'm capable of having done otherwise. That's like the best way for me to kind of succinctly put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just trying to figure out if I am correctly understanding what you're saying, and if I am, how that is not. I'm trying to figure out how that's not a contradiction in terms. You know what I mean? Like
How, in what way do you
that's,
think it's
maybe
a
it's just me.
contradiction?
Um, there, if you don't have the capacity to do differently than X, we'll say, then when X and Y are presented to you, you're going to choose X, and there was never a possibility of you choosing Y in the first place.
Mm-hmm. We live in
Um,
so far so good.
okay. So there's no uh, choice there. There's no choice because there isn't a choice.
So
It's
so
you.
the whole point of compatibilism is trying to make the distinction where you still have a will. Your
Mhm.
own, like from the beginning of time though, what you are going to will has been set because we live in a deterministic universe. So you're
Mhm.
going to will something and you're going to pick whatever you will. But the thing that you will is determined. So that's why
Okay,
they call
that
it
putting it that way
compatibilist.
makes
Yeah.
more sense. Okay.
Yeah. You're going to do what you will, but what you will is determined.
No worries.
So yeah, your will is what you, like you're going to do what you will, but what you will is determined. That's my
Okay.
stance.
Okay. Uh, and so it might be worth taking 30 more seconds to talk about what the will is. What is the will? It's
So
not. I would. Go ahead.
to me, calling something the will is like a little weird. Really, what it is the brain, and whatever you will is whatever you desire because of the neurons in your brain firing certain ways. That's pretty much
Okay.
it.
Okay. Uh, let's talk about the. So okay. So then when it comes to holding people accountable for things that they do wrong, have you ever okay, hypothetical scenario, let's say your house was broken into, um would you call the police and have them
Me,
follow up on
yeah.
that?
I totally would.
Why?
Well, for a couple reasons. So first, I would call the police in the hopes that the criminal is caught.
Okay.
If the criminal is caught, I would hope that the criminal, gets a fair trial and then goes to jail or whatever. And then I would hope that that criminal never does that kind of thing again. So just because I think that things are determined, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the determination is, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do something. At every second of every day, all of the atoms in my body are doing something, and
Mm-hmm.
I will, I desire for people not to break into my house, and so I'm going to take
Mm-hmm.
action to see if I can stop that from happening.
How could you stop that from happening? Since everything that is predetermined, since everything is predetermined.
So if it was going to happen, it was determined to happen, but I don't know what is determined to happen and what's not determined to happen, and I'm going to do something,
Right.
And so I think that even if like whether or not I go by a fancy alarm system is determined in the same way that the guy who's going to break into my house, like whether or not he's going to break into my house is determined. But it is entirely possible that like deterministically I will go buy an alarm system and then that alarm system will ring and then the guy will run away instead of breaking into my house. And it's also deterministically possible that the opposite is true, where I never buy it and then the guy does break into my house. Just because things are going to happen one way or the other doesn't mean that I like am just going to lie down and accept it. You know what I mean? Pretty much all that I'm saying with compatibilism is like one set of events is going to occur. That's kind of it. Like that's something's gonna happen. That's kind of, and the thing that's gonna happen is the thing that is determined to happen. That's kind of all I'm saying. It's like not as grand as you might think it is.
So that might be an excellent segue into the is-ought problem, and we are almost done here. I will be wrapping up before sunset.
No rush.
So we've talked briefly about the is-ought problem in recent past. If you could take it away and lay out for us what that is.
So the is-ought problem is just the idea that you can't get an ought from an is. You might say that like it is painful for a baby to be tortured, but then you cannot conclude from that you ought not torture babies. Like, so what if it's painful for babies? What if I enjoy inflicting pain upon babies? Like, then I should torture babies, right? So it's impossible to get an ought from an is. And as far as I'm aware, nobody has ever solved this problem. And that's because I think that ought is essentially just a fancy way of saying, like, well, I desire it to be so. That's kind of what I think. And so... yeah, that's the is-ought problem is that it is impossible to derive an ought from an is.
Impossible in what sense? In an empirical sense, or in what?
No, in like a logical sense too. Like, so imagine a syllogism that goes like, it is painful for babies for them to be tortured. Premise 2. There is no premise 2. Conclusion. You ought not torture babies. Like, that doesn't follow. Like, you would have to have an if-then statement. Like, if it is painful for babies not to be tortured, then you ought not torture babies. It is painful for babies to be tortured. Therefore, you ought not torture babies. But now you're getting an ought from an if, not an ought from an is. So it is possible to get oughts from ifs, but it's not possible to get oughts from ises. That's the whole is-ought problem. Like, so there is no ought that is irrespective of some kind of if statement. That's another way, I guess, of phrasing the is-ought problem.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think through that one and do a follow-up with it.
Yeah, no. Guess what? We can have another conversation, 2 months from now if you have some really good ideas where you're like, oh man, I should have really grilled Kevin on this because he was being really stupid and I just didn't press him on it. We'll do another one.
Okay, awesome. Almost there.
Okay.
So I want to explore the topic in light of everything that's been said. You were married.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you?
So, I mean, I guess like, at a very basic level, it means that like, we get to report our income as if we're one person and we pay less taxes and there's like benefits, like healthcare benefits. Like she's on my benefits and she wouldn't be able to be on my benefits if we weren't married. So in that sense, I just think that like, what does it mean to me? Well, it means that like, it's a legal recognition of our union, for like lack of a better way to phrase it, I guess. And I'm a little bit like, so our marriage ceremony was a 10-minute ceremony in the church that my grandparents founded. And we haven't had any kind of party or anything since then. And I'm a little bit against wedding culture in that sense, where I think that like the whole big thing of it is kind of a big waste of time and money. But I love my wife. She's my absolute best friend, and marrying her was not a mistake. But I kind of hate weddings. So what does marriage mean to me? Not as much as it means to a lot of other people, probably. Yeah, and I don't think that two people need to be married in order for them to love each other or anything like that.
Okay. And what is, let's skip over to love for the moment. What is love?
So at like, you know, I could describe it to you in like what it looks like, but at the end of the day, it's chemical reactions in your brain.
Okay. So when somebody says, I love you, what they're saying is I chemical reaction you, essentially.
I think that when people say I love you, I think what they're meaning, I think that what they mean is like, I'm going to act in a certain way towards you. So like, I'm going to show you affection. I am going to share my stuff with you. I'm going to, you know, be physically intimate with you. I'm going like when, you know, well, I guess it depends on the kind of love, right? Because love has like different meanings.
Right.
But, you know, in the context of like a married couple, probably some sort of physical intimacy, you know. So I think that when people say I love you, I think that what they're saying is more about their actions than it is about like the chemistry within their brain. But like at the end of the day, I do think that all emotions are brain states. And by brain state, I mean like the chemistry in your brain and the neurons firing in certain ways inside your brain. So, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you're an engineer by trade, not a brain scientist, but do you happen to know if the chemicals involved in one type of love are different from the chemicals involved in another type of, like when you say I love you grandma, or is there a different set of chemicals flowing there than when you say I love you wife, you know, or whatever?
Probably. So I don't know. And like I should just like I don't know, and that's the end of it. But let me speculate. I bet you it's different because I'm sure that I love you grandma is way more similar to I love you my best friend in whom I have no romantic, like, so I'm straight. So like I love my male friends, but I probably love my grandma way more similarly to how I love my male friends than I do my wife. You know, I love my wife in a very different way than I love my grandma and my male friends. And I do love my grandma in a different way than I love my male friends too. But my grandma and my male best friends are probably more similar than my male best friends and my wife, or my grandma and my wife. So I bet you that the brain state is different, but I don't know, but I bet.
Okay. Yeah, I have no idea. I just was curious if you happen to.
I don't know. Like everything that I said was conjecture. I don't know, but I bet.
Okay. 2 questions left.
Cool.
First question. If I were to say I'm hungry, and you said you should eat something, and I said, what's the point of that? Of eating? How would you respond?
So in this hypothetical scenario, I said should as in ought, like you ought to eat. So I would tell you that there's like an implied if statement buried within that ought, because you're right. Like ought you eat? I don't know. Ought you eat? I have no idea. I can't get an ought from an is. However, I think that there's this buried ought in there where it's like, if you are hungry, you ought to eat. Or if you want to not be hungry, you ought to eat. So there's this buried if ought statement, if then, inside of the ought. But like if I just like walked up to you and you were like, you ought to eat, and then you were like, why? I'm not hungry. I'd be like, okay, I guess you ought not eat then. Like, you got me. But if you were like, I'm hungry, and I was like, you ought to eat, and you're like, why? I would say, if you are hungry, you ought to eat. You are hungry. Therefore, you ought to eat. That would be my response. That there's a buried if then statement within the ought that we didn't say it out loud, but that's what we mean.
Okay. Okay. So then last but not least, just if God did exist, how would this be different?
It depends on the kind of God that we're talking about. I could imagine a deistic God existing where nothing would be different. Um, like this deistic God very well might just be the universe in like a pantheistic kind of way, and then like nothing at all would be different. Um, but if we're talking about like the God of like, if we're talking about like the normal Catholic God, then
Mhm.
I would imagine like a world way more similar to that of like the Lord of the Rings, or I'm a big fantasy nerd, so like the Stormlight
Same
Archive
here.
or Mistborn or any of the like the high fantasy books where like good always triumphs over evil, and like stuff like that. I imagine would probably be like that's what I would expect to see. Probably I wouldn't know for sure. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know if there was like this all powerful, all good being. I would probably expect it to be a little bit more obvious. Um, it's certainly not impossible that that being does exist, and that I'm just wrong about like maybe it really is good that like all of these bad things have happened. Like that's
Mhm.
possible. It just doesn't seem
Okay.
that way to me. So,
Okay.
and then also there would probably be some kind of like predictions that we could make, like because I can imagine like this all powerful, all good being truly existing would prevent certain things from happening. So like theoretically, like we should be able to like set up an experiment where like we try to throw an innocent baby into a like a meat grinder, but like every time that we go to throw the baby, like we slip and like the baby survives, or like we just miss the meat grinder and the baby falls onto a pillow.
Mhm.
Like these kind of predictions like that prevented evil from prevailing over good, or better
Mhm.
yet, if uh like if we really tried, like if we could set up some experiment where like we would make sure that the gates of hell like did prevail against the Catholic Church, but like at the last minute something stopped it every single time. Like that'd be a really cool prediction that we could make. Stuff like that. That's kind of just like where my empirical engineer brain goes. Also, prayers being answered would be like a big thing. There's been studies on the effects of intercessory prayer, and they all
Mhm.
come up as having no effect at all. Or if they do have an effect, it's actually a negative effect, because people like white coat syndrome, when they know that they're expected to get better, they actually do worse because it's like bad for their health for them to like be expected to recover. Um, so I would expect like the prayer studies to have come out differently if there was a God. If there was a God who answered prayers. Now, if there's a God who
Yeah.
didn't answer prayers, then obviously that would be different. But so
Right.
that's just some off the
That's
cuff
interesting.
ideas.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting because I have seen studies that suggest the opposite, that demonstrate
Ooh,
that
share them
prayer
with
does
me.
work.
Share them with me.
Yeah.
I want to
Well,
see
it's
them.
been a while, so it might be a challenge to go back and find them, but I will definitely try and do that.
Yeah.
But then the tricky part becomes one's understanding of prayer on that, because if you, for example, if some folks kind of look at prayer more mechanistically rather than relationally.
And this is
So,
why I
you know,
specified intercessory prayer only.
mhm.
Like not all prayer is intercessory prayer.
Yeah. Well, and then beyond that, though, you brought up the topic just a minute ago about the potential for certain things going wrong, but ultimately to a positive end. I think a very quick, simple example of that would be um, nothing's going wrong, but a negative up front with a positive, a far greater positive return will be something like a vaccination or something, where you're being poked in the arm. You're being caused harm essentially, but the ultimate result of that is ideally protection from some greater disease. Something that is going to cause a lot more harm than a quick jab in your arm will. Um, so so the tricky part of on intercessory prayer is becomes, how do you determine whether or not it's working, whether or not it works, given the fact that the definition of working is hard to come by, since you're not since you don't have the ultimate perspective on what that
The
person's scenario
Yeah, the
is.
way that the study worked that I'm talking about is they took like a very sick patient population in a certain hospital, and they all had the same kind of illness. It was like a certain kind of cancer that had like something like a 50-50 death rate or something, or maybe it was 20-80, who knows. But they split them into 3 control groups, or 3 different groups. One of them they did nothing different for. One of them, they brought pictures and like descriptions of them to like various churches in the area, and they said like, hey, please pray for this guy. He has cancer and he needs your prayers to recover. Please pray for him, and we're going to see if he gets better. And then the third group, they brought their pictures to the churches, and they told the patient, we have whole bunches of people praying for you, buddy. So, you know, pull through, man, because we're all rooting for you. We're praying for you. And there was no statistical difference between those 3 groups. And in fact, it wasn't a statistical difference, but the group that did the worst was actually the group that knew that people were praying for them. And there is a phenomenon called like white coat syndrome or something, where it's like, if you know that you are supposed to get better, you actually get better less, because like it puts stress on your system, and stress on your system is like bad for you. So I'm not a doctor, so this is probably wrong, but it's something like that. So that's the particular study that I'm talking about. So they were praying for a direct intercession of God, like, hey God, these people are sick, we want you to intercede and make them better. That kind of prayer appears not to work. So I can't comment on other kinds of prayer, but intercessory prayer appears not to work.
Well, and that was what I was speaking to when I said that the tricky part about determining whether it works or not is who knows what the ultimate plan is there, if there is one, you know. So okay, well, that was a lot. I've said a lot, I feel like, even though you've been the one who's doing the answering of the questions, that kind of thing. So I think we can safely turn the tables at this point.
Okay, cool.
And there is, I'll just say right now that there is, I can already tell you that I do want to follow up. I do have more to say and ask and that kind of thing, but I think this is a good stopping point for now. We've said a lot. And
I love it. That makes a lot of sense. I'm totally cool with that. And I'll probably end just, you know, scratching the surface for you too. And we'll do this again sometime. But I want to start with just you telling me in, you know, 2 minutes or something. So, I mean, are you Catholic? I know that you are.
Yes.
Tell me why you're Catholic. And then like add information about like, are you a cradle Catholic? Were you always serious? Did you ever have any kind of religious experiences? Stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I don't know, about 2 minutes, but I'll try.
You can take longer if you need it.
Okay. I am Catholic. I am what most people would call a cradle Catholic. But as a kid, I lived in a nominally Catholic home. Basically, we were required to go to church about 49 or 50 out of every 52 Sundays a year. The other 2 or 3 Sundays, either I or one of my siblings would succeed in pretending that we were just too tired to make it out of bed. And so my parents would give up at that point and say, okay, forget about it, you know. But yeah, most Sundays we were required to go to church, and that was the end of it. There was no prayer at home, no talk of God, nothing, just church every Sunday. We were sent to Catholic grade in high schools, but all 3 of those things, the Catholic grade school that I went to, the high school that I went to, and the Catholic church that I went to, all at that time were, I would say, minimally Catholic. They were, for example, one of the art classes that I took in high school was called Images of God in Art. Well, it was all about the Roman gods and the Greek gods, so nothing to do with the Judeo-Christian God, for example. So it's a very watery version of the faith that I experienced growing up. That started to change when I was 12 years old. I was hanging out in my room one day, just doing whatever. Don't remember what I was doing. It was nothing religious, that's for sure. All of a sudden, for about a period of about 30 seconds, 60 seconds, something like that, I just suddenly became aware within myself of the fact that God was real. It wasn't something that I reasoned to. I didn't sit there thinking about different religious propositions and then just decide, you know, therefore, God must be real after all. It was a non-intellectual experience. It was entirely spiritual. It was like something, a light came on or something in my soul, and I just knew for the next 30, 60 seconds, it's real. The story, I remember thinking, the stories that I've heard about God and the saints and this and that, the other thing, they're not just stories, they're real. He's real. That faded away after about a minute and on with life. But the sort of residue of that remained over the next several years. The only resources with which I was familiar at the time, in terms of Christian materials, were Protestant sources, so Protestant radio station, Protestant bookstores, that kind of thing. So over the next several years, more and more of my life became explicitly Christian, Protestant in particular. More and more of the books I had in my bookshelf started to become Christian. More of the pictures that went up on my wall were Christian, that kind of thing. So there was something going on sort of that I wouldn't have been able to explain at the time. When I was 18, I came across my first Catholic resource. It was a bookstore in the area. And the owner of the bookstore invited me to become part of a weekly rosary-based prayer group. And so I accepted that. And so then every week for the next several years, I was praying the rosary with this group. And started leading a regular prayer life, and then just participating more consciously and intentionally in the church's life, resulted in this new awareness. It's hard to explain, but again, I felt like the Holy Spirit just sort of opened up a new understanding of things to me that's not something you can just sort of reason to. It's something that you have to be enlightened to get. And from there, it was at about the age of 18 that I was like, okay, yeah, this Catholic thing. Prior to that, I kind of thought it was cool. I had this nebulous sense that it's cool to be Catholic because the church is so big, it's got the Pope as its head, and that kind of thing. But my thought was, the Pope and the bishops, they're old men. They don't understand what it's like to be an American, that kind of thing. So they don't, they're cool and all, but they don't get it, That changed after I started developing regular prayer life. And I just saw things in a new way. Subsequent to that, had my faith tested in lots of different ways over the next several years, from the atheism angle, from the Islam angle, from the more liberal Catholic angle, that kind of thing. And just kind of started working through each one of those challenges. And I'm a very open-minded individual who's focused on truth, regardless of where that truth leads. And I just feel like all of that has come together to create an even more firm Catholic that I am today. And that, in a nutshell, is my testimony.
Cool. Well, I just want to start off by saying that the fact what you said there at the end about you being open to truth and just kind of like letting you truth lead the way is, first of all, awesome. And then second of all, it's evidently true. I think in this conversation that we've been having, you seem, this is, it's not like we're best friends. We've known each other all of our lives, but from what I can tell in this conversation, that appears to be absolutely the case. You seem very open-minded and you seem very much willing to just let the truth lead you wherever it goes. And I think that's just really cool. So I just wanted to say, hey, that's pretty dope. Okay. But let me drill down a little bit. I think I want to start with the religious experience part. So, I guess first I'll ask you if you agree with this statement. Religious experiences are necessarily first person and therefore can't really be used to convince anybody besides yourself. So what I'm trying to say is, like, I shouldn't hear about your religious experience and then think to myself, like, wow, I'm convinced, right? Like, do you agree with that? That seems to be the case to me.
I think I understand what you're saying. And if I do, I have to say it depends. And the reason I say it depends is because if the scenario is that I'm relating a religious experience of the nature that I just did, do I think it's reasonable for you to then go, oh, well, you had a religious experience, so yeah, I should believe? No, strictly speaking, no, I don't. I think because honestly, people can get confused and perceive a religious experience, or perceive a psychological experience to be a
Mm-hmm.
religious one, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So just that experience all by itself, I would say no. But there are some religious experiences that come with physical dynamics. There are people who see a light, for example, that's suddenly in the sky, and who are not actually Catholic in the first place, or not even Christian. Or Our Lady has been seen in Zaytun, Egypt, by thousands of people: Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, atheists. So that kind of religious experience should be a compelling.
Yes, it definitely makes sense to draw a distinction between something like Our Lady of Fatima and then a religious experience like the one that you had. That makes a lot of sense to me. But would you agree with me that the religious experience that you had yourself is probably not one that could be used to convince anybody else? Like, you kind of have to experience it to get it, kind of?
Yes.
Yeah. That is what I thought too, and I didn't think you would disagree. I just wanted to see, like, hey, maybe we do disagree. So okay, so let's say that you had never had that religious experience. Do you think that you would still be religious today? Or maybe a better way to describe this is, how much of your current religiosity, or how much of your current religious fervor, I don't know what the right word is, how much of your current religiousness would you attribute directly to that religious experience? Do you think that it's like 75% of it, or do you think it's like 2% of it? Like, yeah, it helped, but like, I'd still be here without it.
I think I attribute all of it to, well,
Wow. Okay.
depending on how you quantify it. Because, for example, because the alternative that I would imagine would have been simply that I may have continued to go to church all the time. I may not have, when I became an adult. But it would have been that external thing again, where I'm just going through the emotions, and I'm in church because that's what you're supposed to do, as opposed to wanting to be there. So yeah, most of my religiosity, again, depending on how you want to quantify it, all of it maybe hinges on that experience.
And so the reason I ask is because I've had similar experiences. So I have very distinct memories of one time. So we went to confession once a week as part of the school. We went to mass every morning and confession once a week as part of the school that I attended in the basement of the FSSP church that I grew up in. And I distinctly remember the chapel was mostly empty because mass had ended, but I was staying for confession. And I was kneeling, saying my penance. And like, right when I finished up my penance, I distinctly remember just being overwhelmed by this like really strange emotion that at the time I described as like just like feeling the real presence of God, like, because I just had been at mass, I just went to confession, and I almost would have described it like, this is what levitating feels like. Now, obviously, I know that I didn't actually levitate, but I felt like I was floating. Like, it felt crazy. And I still remember what that felt like. And I was probably roughly the same age as you. I was probably like 12 or something. Like, I was probably in like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, something like that. And I don't believe anymore, So, I guess, why do you think that is? Like, I remember experiencing something, but then, so it's probably not surprising to you that I don't associate that feeling with anything non-natural anymore.
Right.
And the reason I don't do that is because I've gone to like really good concerts and I felt the same way. Like being at a live performance where, so I'm into nerd music, and there's this guitarist named Steve Vai who I love. And I was at a Steve Vai concert when I was probably 16 or 17, and I felt like the exact same thing. Whatever. Doesn't matter the age. And so I now think about that experience that I had in the church after confession as being something that can be explained naturally, not supernaturally. So I guess why do you think that? Why do you think that I think about that now this way, but you don't think about your experience that way? Do you think that our experiences themselves were pretty different? And then I guess further, you seem pretty convinced that yours would be like a supernatural experience, not a natural experience, right? And so, like, I guess, how did you come to that determination that this could not be a natural thing?
Yeah, good questions. I don't. First of all, I don't know whether I can't say whether we had the same experience or not.
Fair point.
So there's that. That being said, I think that the quick, simple answer to your question about why you now don't believe and I don't would be choice. I think it's a collection of. Let me stop. Let me keep it simple for the moment and just say it's a choice. It's you chose to stop believing and I've chosen to continue to believe. I'll expound on that in a minute.
I'd love to revisit that too.
Yeah, definitely.
I asked you like 5 questions, so I'm not going to interrupt you after you answer the first
one. No worries. So then the third question was, what convinces me that when I say I had this spiritual experience, that it really was spiritual as opposed to just psychological? That's a great question. It's one that I take a particular interest in addition to theology. Psychology is my second greatest passion in life. So I can't pretend that I've studied it formally extensively, but it's something that I have just sort of naturally gifted in, just being able to read people and understand thoughts and feelings and why they're there and that kind of thing. On top of that, I would describe myself as a natural skeptic too. So I am inclined to deny extraordinary explanations for things up front and to need proof or strong evidence to believe in, so for example, when people come out and say, I just saw Mary's face in the toothpaste that I put my toothbrush on, it's a miracle. I usually am like, oh my goodness gracious, whatever, not only do I not believe, I actively dislike a lot of that stuff because I think it's silly. So to try and answer your question, I think it was spiritual and not psychological because as I already mentioned, I was not engaged in any kind of psychological activity at that point related to religion. I wasn't thinking about religious things at that time. I was not engaged in anything that would have instilled that kind of a feeling in me in the first place. I don't know. It's difficult to describe. And yeah, because it's not, it's hard. It's hard to put into words. And it's something that this is tough. I don't know. I have not experienced anything like that since then. Did not experience anything like that before then. And it triggered something in my mind. It had an effect, even though it was not a psychological event. It had an effect on my psyche. And that is, it's not supposed to happen that way. If it's just a psychological thing, then it's something in the psyche that then produces something in the rest of you, but if it's a spiritual event, then it's something that is occurring in the spirit and then would have an effect on everything else. And so it's similar to, I don't know if you've done any reading on near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there was one doctor who testifies to the idea that there's a very clear difference between a near-death experience and a nightmare or a dream or a very positive dream of some kind. he talks about how when people have these vivid, lucid dreams, that are really intense one way or the other, what they end up doing is trying to figure out how those dreams fit into their worldview when they wake up. Whereas when people have a near-death experience, it's the other way around. They try to figure out how to fit their worldview into the experience they've had, because it's so overwhelming in a sense. It's so it's in a sense bigger than reality. So I don't know. I don't. It's kind of. I feel like I'm kind of describing a black hole. I can't really show you what a black hole is. I can only show you what the effects are on the outside, universe.
Okay. I mean, hey, cool. I'm happy just to kind of put a pin in that there. And then if we want to come back to that one in a future conversation or something, that's totally cool with me.
Cool.
So I got like a weird one for you. One of my qualms with the Catholic Church in particular is that to be a Catholic, you have to hold to everything that the Catholic Church teaches. This is not similar to like most other religions. Like all of the Protestant denominations, you have a lot of leeway. There's not a whole lot of, I mean, there's some leeway. Like there's leeway in practices and stuff like that in being a Catholic. But like when it comes to dogma, like you gotta believe the dogma and that's it, kind of. And it's that way for like a lot of things. So I guess I'll ask you, do you agree with the Catholic Church on 100% of everything? Or are there some things where you're like, I don't know if that's right, but the Catholic Church is mostly right, or anything like that?
Yeah. So the quick, simple answer would be yes. I agree with the church 100%. Now, the more nuanced answer or expanded answer wants to point out that it's important to be careful that when we talk about the church saying this or teaching that we're talking about stuff that it really does teach or does say dogmatically, as opposed to just a speculation even. I would say it's probably safe to say that most of the church's teaching is dogmatic. There's a lot more dogmas out there than people realize, I think.
And well, maybe what we want to do is we want to actually specify between infallibility statements and dogma, because the Catholic Church actually only has like a pretty limited number of dogma. Dogma is that which is defined as dogma. Like the church has like a list of dogma, but then the church will say a whole bunch of things infallibly without it being dogma. So an example of this is whenever the ordinary magisterium speaks in like a unified way about faith and morals, that is an infallible statement. Point blank. The end. My argument there is that means that canonizations are all infallible, even though none of them are dogma. So.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So not every infallible statement is dogma.
Okay. That might be fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to stay focused though, so what I'm getting at is, there are some people who would say, well, how can you agree with what the church says when, like Galileo, for example, the church said the sun revolves around the earth when, it's the other way around, and the church was obviously wrong there. So, well, in a case like this, yes, that's true. The church never. There were many in the church who believed that the sun revolved around the earth instead of the other way around. But that idea was never a dogma of the church.
Right. And
so the church recognizes a distinction between official teaching, and non-official teaching or speculation or that kind of thing. And so, yes, I agree 100% with all of the dogmatic teachings of the church. But before anybody comes back and says, well, what about this or what about that? I would caution that they make sure that it's official teaching that they're taking issue with as opposed to non-official.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we'll be good to wrap up because I've kept you for a long time. I'm looking at it. It's almost 2 hours.
I was wondering.
One more question. So you and I met on the Brian Holdsworth website. Blog portal thing. And the reason that we met is because Brian Holdsworth responded to a video. He responded to my like introduction to the non-traditional Catholic video, and he left a whole big response about morality, and then Kyle, who interviewed me and is a Brian Holdsworth fan. I mean, I'm a Brian Holdsworth fan too, for the record. Even though I disagree with him on a lot of things, I still consider myself a fan. Kyle made a post on Brian Holdsworth's website about me. Brian wrote to Kyle about me. Kyle let me know that Brian was writing about me. I joined Brian's website, left a comment, and then that's how me and you started talking, because you responded to me on Brian Holdsworth's website. And we were talking about objective morality. That was kind of like the thing that started, like, that's objective morality is where it all started. So I thought it would be real poetic if we could end on objective morality. We went over objective morality in terms of like my stance on it and all that, but I want to know about you. Obviously, I know that you accept that morality is objective, and you would say that morality is grounded in God, because that's what all Catholics are kind of bound to believe. But I guess my question to you would be, how do you know that morality is indeed objective? Whenever I ask people this, most of the time the answer that I get is just an appeal to intuition. So, well, it's just intuitively obvious. Like, it's written on our hearts. It certainly feels that way, doesn't it? And I'll be like, all right, yeah, I mean, a lot of intuitions are false though, right? So my question is, why do you accept that morality is indeed objective? Is it only intuition, or is it something more?
I'll tell you what, I feel like it's a multifaceted thing for me. And so it's also something that I would love to be able to think through for a little bit first, and then so I can articulate it in a more clear way.
Yeah, no,
so if we
say
can
no more.
Cut
That's
here
awesome.
and then glue something back in, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Honestly, I can even just leave that last segment right in there. Like, hey, I just need a minute to think about it. Let's talk about it next time.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that
Cool.
one too.
Cool. Well,
So are we wanting to try and examine where we diverge at this point, or do we want to leave that for another?
I've kept it for 2 hours.
Okay.
I'm totally cool with leaving it here. I think we kind of did talk about where we diverge a little bit. Now we didn't drill down into like where's the first place that we actually diverge or anything, but we started. So I think that this is a really good place for you and I to leave it. And let's do it again. Let's both think about things for the next however long. And let's do this again. YouTube isn't going to cancel my show, I don't think. So, come back for this. This was Conversations with Catholics episode 2. Come on back for episode 3, 4, 5, and 6. We'll do as many as we need. I had a great time talking to you. I think this was a great conversation. And I think that this, if nothing else, was just like a really good way for me and you to kind of because neither of us pushed back super hard on one another. We kind of just got to know our positions a little bit more. And I think it's going to be cool to look in Conversations with Catholics, the next episode with you on it. I think it would be cool to kind of pick up where we left off and then see where we can, drill down a little bit and see like, where is it that we like really, diverge. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Cool, man. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. I'm going to, send this link to you so that you can review it before we post it, and that'll be it.
All right, sounds good. Well, I appreciate your time, man, and we'll definitely look forward to getting that link, and we'll set something up after that for a round 2.
Love it.
All right.
Great talking to you.
Likewise. Have a good day.
You do the same. Bye.
Thank you.